Okay, thank you everyone for coming out to another evening with us in the House Finance Committee. We've got a full schedule tonight, but I do want to welcome those who are here in the room and those of you who are at home or coming to us live. And also I want to thank all of my colleagues who have tuned in to us. Also, still in this time of COVID, we're trying to get the people's business done. The first thing I'd like to do, Mr. Clerk, would you please call a roll to see if we have a quorum established, please?
Chairman Abbey,
Present.
Vice Chair Slater, Vice Chair Mazurkowski,
Present.
Representative Amore,
Present.
Representative Baginski,
Present.
Representative Barrows,
Present.
Representative Diaz, Representative Edwards, Representative Hull,
Present.
Representative Nadone, Representative O'Brien,
Here.
Representative Quattrucci,
Present.
Representative Ruggiero,
Present.
Representative Tabone, Representative Ella Wilkinson, Representative Ella Wilkinson,
Present.
and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I will explain a little bit about how we will conduct business this evening, and then as we go through each phase, I'll keep us all informed on where we are. Again, because we're having to do this in a new environment, it's just important that our guests who are waiting on the phone for us and also our colleagues at home know exactly where we are in the process, and that'll help us move this along. So we just took attendance, and we do have a quorum to do business. Tonight we're going to have a couple of bills that we will actually consider, and the difference between hearing and considering a bill is, as I've said 100 times, when we actually consider a bill, we vote on it to send it to the floor for debate. This is not the place to debate the bills that are considered because they've been heard before, but this is the time that we will determine if we send it to the floor for debate or not, and that is where it is actually passed or not passed to go into law. So that's one of the things we will do this evening. After that, there are 3 or 4 bills that we will hold for further study. As I always say, holding a bill for further study basically means that it is introduced, it is talked about, and if there's work that needs to be done on the bill, which generally there is on almost all, not quite, but most all, that is why we hold a bill for further study. We don't hold it to kill it or anything like that. I know that's been out there for a long time, but a lot of this has work to be done with people who are interested in both sides, and we do our best to make sure that we represent both sides of that. After that's done, we will have a briefing by Sharon and her staff on the issues tonight, the articles that they're going to brief us on. And then there's a point in time for a few questions, if any. Then we will have the administration who will be up to give us more in-depth information about those, and the same thing. If there are any questions, that's the time to formulate them and ask them. After that point, we have about 3 or 4 bills that we will put into play this evening, and that is the sponsor will introduce those bills, or if the sponsors aren't here, I will simply introduce them. And if there are any questions or discussions on those, we will do that. And then finally, and most importantly, we have a number of guests who are on the phone lines tonight, and we will do our best to get those guests in as quickly as possible. And I always say, because we're having to do this remotely, it's not easy for any of us, but we ask that you make your comments as brief as possible, a couple of minutes or more, as to why you support one of these bills or why you do not support one of these bills, and that's it. We have the opportunity for people who want to give us information to do so in writing, so you get 2 bites at the apple. You can send us information in writing. That can be position papers, it can be studies, but we ask for your testimony to be short, to the point, and actually, in my experience, listening at people's testimony, no determination of how long it takes. We always learn a lot more, I think, from listening to the person talk. But because we have a lot of people who are lined up, we want to make sure everyone gets an opportunity to testify. And I'll be keeping us informed of this as we go along. So the first technical thing that we will do is we'd like to make sure that we put the bills that we're going to consider on the floor and into operation. So could I get a motion? We have two bills. They are Bill House 5012 Sub A and 5224 Sub A.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One at a time.
Just one, no, it'll be one at a time. That's true, but I just wanted to get both there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What's that? Correct, yeah. Okay. Okay, my turn just corrected me. I will give an explanation of both the bills, and then we will put them into motion. But again, these bills are being considered. They're not being voted into practice as a law. So, and if you have, usually there aren't many questions because they've been heard before. But if you do have some questions, we do have Sharon and Mr. Carr here who, if it's just for a technical question or so, they would be gladly to answer those. Okay, so the first bill that I will explain will be Bill 5012 by Representative Slater, who unfortunately could not be here tonight. But it is it's the Sub A. Did I do that correct, Ms. Scott? Do we have to go? It's the Sub A to it, correct. So this bill, it makes some changes to 5012 by Slater, and it mandates minimum staffing levels at nursing homes, provides a grant program for enhanced training for staff, provides a 3-year base rate adjustment for nursing homes, and provides for wage increases for direct care workers subject to the rate of inflation. Now, the Sub A makes these following changes. Remember I said that sometimes bills are worked on, and this one was. So the Sub A makes the changes that I will note now. The first change is that it pushes back the staffing mandate from July 1, 2021 to January 1, 2022. The second thing it does, it reduces the mandate from 4.1 hours of direct nursing per resident per day to 3.58 hours. The third thing it does, it provides for the mandate to increase to 3.81 hours on January 1st, 2023. The next thing it does, the next change, it provides for rules and regulations by October 15th, 2021. The next is that it provides for compliance to be determined quarterly as opposed to daily or weekly. The next thing it does is it adds the following as direct care workers: physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech language pathologist, mental health workers who are CNAs, and physical therapist assistants. It also provides for enhanced training to be funded from DLT workforce development resources instead of a $600,000 appropriation. It also provides nursing homes with a base rate staffing adjustment of 0.5% on October 1, 2021, 0.75% on October 1, 2022, and 1% on October 1st, 2023.
Lobbyists.
It also provides for 80% instead of 100% of the inflation index to be dedicated to pay raises for direct care workers which would include increases in benefits. And then finally, it provides for 80% of the base rate staffing adjustment to be dedicated to pay raises for the direct care workers in years when no inflationary index is applied. So those were some of the changes that were made to the original bill, which is now what makes it a sub A, and it makes generally these things make the bill better, is what happens. So if there, and I'll take them one at a time. You want to be noted in the, okay, Rep. O'Brien is here and he's noted as present.
Present.
So, thank you. Okay, so now what we'll do is, if there are no questions, we'll have a motion to send this bill to the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to indefinitely postpone House Bill H5012 and move passage of H5012 sub A. Seconded.
So it's been moved and seconded that House Bill 5012 sub A be sent to the floor for further discussion and debate. Would you please call the roll, Mr. Clerk?
Chairman Abney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slater, Vice Chair Mazakowski,
Yes.
Representative Amore,
Yes.
Representative Baginski,
Yes.
Representative Barrows, Representative Barrows, Representative Diaz,
Yes.
Representative Edwards,
Yes.
Representative Hall,
Yes.
Representative Nadone,
No.
Representative O'Brien,
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Representative Quattrucci,
No.
Representative Ruggiero,
Yes.
Representative Tabone,
Yes.
Representative Vala Wilkinson,
Yes.
Chairman, I'd like to be recognized as a yes.
Okay, thank you. Rep. Barrows would like to be recognized as a yes. Thank you so much. Okay, what was it, the count clerk, please?
12-2.
Oh, 12-2. Okay, so then Bill 5012 sub A by Slater will go to the floor for debate and discussion. The next bill that we will consider, which means taking it to the floor for debate and discussion, is Bill 5224 sub A by Speaker Sikorski. This act removes the sunset on the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship Program. The sub-A codifies that students with disabilities shall be afforded reasonable accommodations to access the program. Could I get a motion for that, please?
I move indefinite postponement of H5224 and move passage of H5224 sub A.
It's been moved in second that...
Mr. Chairman, can I comment?
I'm sorry?
Could I-
Oh, yes.
Could I make a comment?
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I want to do it before the vote, obviously. It should come as no surprise that I'm no fan or supporter of the Promise program, but I did want to acknowledge my esteemed colleague, Minority Whip Representative Michael Chippendale, for his work along with the disabled community on bringing this new language and creating this sub-A. So I really did want to acknowledge Representative Chippendale. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. He does great work. I appreciate that. Okay, no other question then. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Abney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slater, Vice Chair Mazakowski,
Yes.
Representative Amore,
Yes.
Representative Baginski,
Yes.
Representative Barrows,
Yes.
Representative Diaz,
Yes.
Representative Edwards,
Yes.
Representative Hull,
Yes.
Representative Nadone,
Yes.
Representative O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Quattrucci,
No.
Representative Ruggiero,
Oh, yes.
Representative Tabone, and Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Yes.
13 yeas, 1 nay.
Okay, thank you so much. So then that means that that bill will go to the floor for discussion and debate. Okay, thank you. The next technical thing we will do is there are 3 bills this evening that I need to hold for further study, and I think I'm allowed to bundle these bills. I believe so. It is 3 bills. It's Bill 5451, 5452, 5453, and 2 are by Chairwoman Williams, and then 1 is by Rep. Slater. But could I get a motion to hold those 3 bills?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and second that we send those, that we hold those 3 bills for further study. Could I get a roll call, please?
Chairman Abney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slater, Vice Chair Mazakowski,
Yes.
Representative Amore,
Yes.
Representative Baginski, Representative Barrows,
Yes.
Representative Diaz, Representative Edwards,
Yes.
Representative Hull,
Yes.
Representative Nadone, Representative O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Quattrucci,
Yes.
Representative Ruggiero,
Yes.
Representative Tabone, Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Yes.
All set.
Okay, thank you. Those bills will be held for further study. Okay, the next thing we will do now is the staff presentation explaining Article 11 and noting the bills before us. So this is the point where Sharon and her fiscal staff will give us a briefing on that particular article. Sharon?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. We will present our overview of the budget article before you and mention the few other bills that you also have before you. It'll include a summary of the article, but more importantly, some of just the background information that you may need to evaluate the bill before you when the administration takes you through their proposal and answers questions on that. So we tried to do some high-level summary of the bill of the article, as well as some background on what other states are doing and some topics you might want to consider. So Article 11 establishes a 21-plus adult use marijuana program. It provides a way of taxing, including excise and sales tax for related products. The article addresses items such as operating under the influence, workplace provisions, possession, unlicensed sales, production, and then it talks about which populations would be prohibited from using and accessing the product. Just for your information, there's a graphic here showing you across the country where states are in terms of either having some kind of medical program or adult and medical or no program at all. So that's here for your reference. Over the past decade, there have been any number of changes with respect to adult use program. And again, this slide tries to summarize for you chronologically how states have added adult use programs over the past decade, at when they began, and then kind of how they may do it in terms of what kind of taxes are levied on the product. So that's something for you to refer to. In Rhode Island, the medical marijuana program was originally authorized in 2005, and then there have been a number of incremental changes over the years with respect to that program, and also some decriminalization on marijuana possession and certain products with respect to hemp added to the laws, but obviously you have Article 11 before you because there's still no adult use program authorized. Article 11 codifies the central role of the Office of Cannabis Regulation for for this product. This was established, although it's been operating since 2016 for regulation of medical marijuana and hemp. The 2019 Assembly established it as a distinct entity within the Department of Business Regulation. So the Health Department retains certain authority over patients, testing labs, and authorized purchasers under current law, and business regulation deals with more of the business side in terms of compassion centers, cultivators, caregivers, and plant tags. The newly proposed hierarchy, again, centralizes all of the relevant functions within the entities that would be included in the program to be funneled through the Office of Cannabis Regulation. Within Article 11, there are also a number of powers that are proposed for the Office of Cannabis Regulation in the statute. And so they kind of fall into three main categories. There's areas under which the office has broad authority, and that is to issue future non-retail license types, set and revise standards and fees, and other types of licenses. There is authority that's subject to some level of discretion in terms of the number of industry licenses, potency levels, and other items. And then there are areas that must be defined by regulation, license application windows, industry sizes. So there's kind of those groupings in the article of what the office would be required to do. The article allows for there to be, within the first 3 years through 2023, up to 84 licensed retailers, up to 75 new retail licenses, and that would occur in basically 3 application cycles of 25 each. After 2024, any further expansion would be subject to the discretion of the Office of Cannabis Regulation. There is a 20% minority business set aside for each cycle, and that's included in Article 11. For the compassion centers existing and about to be opened once that lottery is done in May, they can get a hybrid license. So there are the 3 existing compassion centers and then 6 new retail-only centers that were authorized in the 2019 session, still yet to be picked. Apparently the lottery is looking to go off sometime in mid-May. We don't have the exact date. So assuming those facilities are in good standing, they shall be granted a license for retail operations under this new authority. And they may also transition to be for-profit entities, and again, all of this subject to guidance from the Office of Cannabis Regulation. And all of this would be conditional on demonstrating to the office that there is no adverse impact to the medical program from their participation in the adult use program. With respect to licensed cultivators, the article allows for, calls for applications to be open for new cultivators on or after July 1, 2021. However, the issuance of such licenses would be at the discretion of the Office of Cannabis Regulation. Current cultivators in the medical program would also get a hybrid license, again conditioned on demonstration that there's no adverse impact for their participation in the retail program to what they're doing now for the medical program. The revenue assumptions that provided with the budget proposal is that only the existing medical cultivators are issued licenses initially. There are cannabis testing labs, and under current law, third-party labs are licensed by the Department of Health in coordination with the Department of Business Regulation, testing and collecting cannabis samples. There's 2 currently licensed and 1 pending license. Article 11 establishes some more prescriptive standards for laboratory proficiency, how the quality control and different types of testing are done, and produces additional classes and types of licenses pursuant to these standards. There's also authority to issue any other supporting licenses for activities beyond just the retail. So it could be for craft cultivation, delivery, transportation, just the smaller industries that might come up around this proposal. And in the first licensing period, there's a 50% set aside for MBE. Again, all of this would be at the Office of Cannabis Regulation's discretion. The article provides for a 15-member reinvestment task force that would, by July 1, 2022, advise the Office of Cannabis Regulation and the Office of Management and Budget regarding long-term investments of proceeds. We've duplicated for you the membership, both ex officio as well as types of groups from which members should be drawn here on this slide for you. There are a number of other report requirements that are here for you, including a disparity study, a study on the impact of adult use on the medical marijuana program, the status of the existing program, which would be which would be required annually, and also a market demand study, which would assess the implementation and how price changes and product availability are working. In terms of enforcement, the Office of Cannabis Regulation's regulation and authority to, would extend the office's regulation and authority to new products for adult use. So as I mentioned, transportation, delivery, also seizure and destruction of product, and security requirements, marketing. And essentially, these would be consistent with the types of regulation authority it has now for the medical program. The product would not be for consumption in public. There are limitations. Public housing standards apply, and essentially it's kind of like the smoke-free regulation there. Those who are renters cannot have their use limited in the case of things that are not being inhaled or smoked. And we've kind of shown you just a grid here of the types of limits that are imposed in the article and are not imposed with respect to residences. Moving on to the financial component, there is in Article 11 a taxation schedule established. This calls for a retail excise tax rate of 10%, and then a cultivation tax, which is done by volume. Right now, that is estimated based on a price of around $300 an ounce to equate to about 3%. And we would note that it also applies to products cultivated for medical consumption. And then, as with the medical tax, as with the medical product, this would all be subject to the 7% sales and use tax. So summarized here, you can see under current law, there's a sales tax for medical, sort of the 4% surcharge, which is also works like a sales tax for an effective tax rate of 11%. Under Article 11, the weight-based tax comes into play for both products, but there is a higher additional surcharge on the adult use. So medical comes in around 14% and adult use at 20%. And again, that weight-based item is really just an estimate of the percent value, because when things are done by volume, you have to kind of know the price to know what it equates to, so that can change. Looking regionally, because this is always a question you may have, we just provide you some look at what regional states are doing, which it turns out to be mostly New York and New England. But just to give you a sense of the taxes and how it works, I'll leave this here for you to refer back to in your deliberations. With respect to municipalities, they may not ban activity by a regular business. They have to be, this would have to be done by referendum. And an election by November 2nd, 2021, and things would have to be in place by April of 2022. They may not prohibit existing medical operations or transportation, and they may assess a one-time impact fee. You may know that in other states there's local fees and on tax add-ons. All of the revenues generated from this program would go into a trust fund, which would then be used for the regulating agencies. Some would be shared with the municipalities, and the rest would go to the state general fund. We've actually showed this graphic 2 years ago when something very similar was proposed. So we've got that here for you to show the number of entities that would be included as a regulating agency, and just so you can see how the money flows. Because fiscal 2022 is a implementation year, and this would not start till towards the end of the year, you can see that the net state revenues only come in under $2 million, but the estimate is that by fiscal 23, there's a net state take of $17 million. The elements of that, according to the budget proposal, are shown line by line here with the excise taxes, the retail sales, the retail excise, the regular sales tax, and any fee revenues, and then deducting the regulatory costs and what would go out to the locals. In terms of the regulatory expenses, the budget you have before you this year has additional FTEs, staffing costs, and operational costs in order to both deal with the regulation as well as some programs around what might be needed with the implementation of adult use program. The local share estimated in fiscal 2023 at 4.2 million, distributed a little bit to everybody, and then by in terms of who's located in each community, and that's shown here for you. Over the 5-year period, with the full ramp up by 2023 and then a more robust market over time, this is the estimate that has been assumed in the budget, and that is about an annual impact to the state of $30.5 million. So the next couple things we want to show you is just some comparisons to help you. It's a very complicated topic, and not everybody can keep track, certainly not me, of all of the different elements. So we try to build a couple tables to compare that to you. So right now, a medical patient gets referred by either going to a regular provider and probably paying a copay, or to some of the specific businesses that are available to do referrals. So they have a cost to participate in that program. Obviously, an adult use consumer would not have that cost. Medical patient would could potentially have the registry card costs as a purchaser or a caregiver. And as I mentioned, the taxes now with the surcharge and the sales, 11%. The excise tax would add to that cost. The adult use consumer would have a higher tax rate. A medical patient does have the ability to possess plants and grow on their own. An adult use consumer would not be able to do that. There are limits for possession of product under both scenarios, but there's no grow allowance for the adult use consumer. For states that establish medical marijuana, a number of them do have now adult use programs. So this graphic tries to crosswalk for you some of the earlier adopter medical marijuana states and where they are in terms of an adult use program. So the way to read this is to see that in the late 90s, 4 states had medical marijuana, all of which now have an adult use program. And then as you move down, fewer of them who brought on programs later have the adult use program. And just, for reference, there's a little bit of history here for you on how the medical marijuana program was initially established back in 2005, and some of the regulatory and structural changes that have been implemented, including expanding some access, including to out-of-state cardholders, increasing fees for compassion centers, and then expanding the number of compassion centers allowed. And so when we talk about the participants in the system, you have the patients, the caregivers, and the authorized purchasers who essentially help a patient maybe who cannot go by their own. And then you have out-of-state cardholders are allowed to access compassion centers with their cards. And then the industries involved right now, the cultivators, they grow the product. There's suppliers, the compassion centers themselves, the initial ones all have retail, growing, and manufacturing facilities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are some testing facilities. For those of you interested in participants, as best we can figure out the growth over time, this graphic tries to show that for you. The blue section being the patients, but you can see just a few years ago it was under 20,000 and went over 20,000, and now the registered patients are actually lower than before, but there's an estimate that people with out-of-state cards are also participating, thousands, in fact, as of fiscal 2020. So that's here kind of just for a sense of how many participants are in the system now. Looking at the revenue taken in through the medical marijuana compassion center collections, as I mentioned, there's that surcharge and the sales tax. Because the surcharge is remitted separately, we're able to use that to extrapolate the sales tax and the gross receipts from the compassion centers now and the total revenue generated in fiscal 20, which is the last full year shown on this chart, set about $7 million total from the sales. 2021, this is to date through March, but that number is likely to hit probably close to $10 million by the end of the fiscal year. I mentioned a short time ago that this proposal is very similar to what was recommended to the 2019 Assembly as part of Budget Article 2020. In 2020, the governor recommended a different setup, and in this one, this would be a state-run system where the state contracts with multiple private operators, splitting the revenues similar to the lottery. So what you have before you, it goes back to more like the 2019 recommendation. Obviously, you all know that there's a separate Senate bill modeled on the Massachusetts program, and although that's not before you, we did try to do a very high-level summary of how it might compare to what is before you tonight. And we leave these slides here for you just for your reference to see that, because there's so many elements that can be different with any proposal. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave with you some sort of basic things that you might consider. There's a lot of elements to consider in areas with respect to these proposals. There's things to consider like what is the right model of operation. There are obviously a number of ways to do it. You've had a number of different ways before you in the last few years. And so your choice there is what's the right structure to pick. What is the right tax type, taxes, fees, who's going to pay them? These are the choices you need to make. Does it make sense to have sales taxes, license and fees, excise taxes? How does the point of collection affect your policy goals? How does the size and of the tax levied affect your policy goals? It would seem that a goal would be to have a stable market and that your costs should not drive consumers to other states or to remain in the illicit market or to the medical market if that's not the appropriate place for the customer. So in looking at that, you want to look at your potency caps, the number of businesses, if price controls are an issue, and all of the things that would affect market stability. Of course, there are numerous criminal and civil issues to be considered with adult use. Questions about, who may exert what authority in which setting, and that, some of that is addressed in these bills before you, whether it be the regulatory hierarchy, criminal penalties, housing, employment, and issues of equity. And finally, how all of this gets integrated with the existing medical marijuana market is certainly an issue for you to consider. As you legitimize the adult use marijuana, you have to think about how that integrates with the current medical system, ensuring that there's appropriate access for patients, and how does the existing market and its interaction with the tax schedule for each group, how does that affect both the users and their choices about which market to remain in. For those of you interested in further research on these issues, there is a wide range of nonpartisan and government research organizations that have available in-depth analyses on all of these issues and more. And we list them here. We certainly try to go to them when we are looking to see what other states do, what are some of the emerging issues, what lessons can be learned from other states' experiences. And so that's just kind of a reminder that there's a great deal of information out there for further review. And then finally, the three bills before you all deal with the medical marijuana existing program. One allocates the current revenues differently, dedicating most of it, instead of the general fund, to distressed communities and charitable organizations. One requires a racial and equity analysis, establishing a mechanism for communities impacted by prohibition to enter legal cannabis activities. And one is a broad changes to the current medical marijuana program, expanding it and reducing fees, repealing plant tags and surcharges and background checks, and the enumeration of what qualifies as a medical condition, and increases the number of compassion centers available. So those are the additional bills before you, and we are here to answer your questions if you have them on our presentation or some of the background we provided. We certainly have spent some time trying to understand this, but do not have all the answers, that's for sure.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm not sure any of us have all of the answers on anything. But thank you also for the information that you provided to all of us, as you do every night. That's very helpful. At this point, if there are any questions from anyone who's here in the room, or I'm looking at my screen now, before I see you, Deb, before we go to the administration, we'd like to get a couple of questions in if possible. Chairwoman Ruggiero has a question, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Sharon, thank you. You had a slide that talked about the taxes, the retail, the cultivation, the sales, the total 20%. If a host community entertains a marijuana retailer, what's the tax benefit for that community? How much do they get out of these revenues?
So what we have here for you is that the total that goes to locals is 15%, but it is divided depending on the community's participation. All communities get a small component, but to the extent they have license holders and a high volume of sales, they get a larger percent. So it really, it depends.
The other question I have, in Massachusetts, what seemed to be an issue were the host community agreements, which gave a lot of power to a lot of the mayors, creating in some cases a pay-to-play. We saw that in Fall River, and that case is unfolding. And I don't know if this is a question for you, but I do see, maybe it's DBR, and I see Liz Tanner and Matt Santacroce on the line. What safeguards and guardrails do we have, or that we can expect, that we don't run into that problem Massachusetts ran into?
So thank you. My understanding is that these approvals will still all go through the state. This is not subject to a local saying okay on an individual basis. These will go through a lottery if it's oversubscribed as you roll through the license rollout. And the zoning has to be applied to everybody equally.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Chairman.
You're quite welcome. Insightful questions as always. I'm continually looking at my screen to see if Representative Baginski, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Sharon, I have a question about slide 25. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly. The excise tax from medical increases from 22 to 23. So is that assuming that the medical industry is going to grow and generate more tax revenue?
If the tax is in place only a portion of the year in 1 year, then it's really
Oh,
just
I
the
see.
annualization of
Okay.
it.
Because what I'm getting at is there evidence to support, maybe from any of the states on slide 30, that simultaneous medical and recreational markets don't impact each other? Is there any expectation that the medical market will shrink once it's legalized for adult users?
So that's a really good question, and something that, we kind of raised at the end as an issue of that every state that talks about this needs to think about. Does it set policies in place that ensures that people are in the right market? And I think that's, policymakers have to make that choice. Are they setting rates in the medical market that make folks who would access the adult use market want to stay in the medical market? Is one being priced out of the other? Are there effective controls to have people where they belong? So it's a great question, and
And subsequently, we might double count revenue that never materializes. We might expect revenue from medical and recreational that
I think the estimate does not double count, but I think it assumes that there's people who are entering the adult use market from current users who are not in a legitimate market right now.
Okay, got it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm still looking out in the stratosphere here to see if any of my other colleagues who are not present have any other questions before we go to the administration. Okay, I think we're clear. So what we'll do now is go into the next phase, and that is Director Warmer has an esteemed crew that he's put together, all professionals in this business. And as usual, Jonathan, if you want to make some opening remarks, or if there are questions that were asked that you think you can answer better, this would be a time to help us. Otherwise, you can direct your colleagues as you wish, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Good to be here again. We certainly do have a number of people here to help. I'm just going to sort of read off the individuals we have here, and then I think I'm going to turn it over to Director Tanner. She has some opening remarks, and then she can direct a couple of the questions that we've already heard. So from OMB, we have Matt McCabe, our chief economist, who did the revenue estimate. From EOHHS, we have Assistant Secretary Anna Navais, who can help with some of the aspects that fall on the HHS side. The Chief of the Office of Cannabis Regulation, Matt Santacroce, and our Chief of Legal Services for DBR, Pam Toro, and certainly the Director of DBR, Liz Tanner. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn it over to Director Tanner for some opening remarks, and then we're happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Chairman. As always, Sharon did a great job and her staff with providing and summarizing all of the information for what's a very, very long article. So I just want to thank her and her staff also for working with our staff on understanding it and asking all the right questions. So it's a pleasure to be here again, and happy to see you all. Thank you for all my colleagues joining as well. Members of the committee, you should have received a 2-page summary from the Department of Business Regulation. If you have that, I'm just going to briefly go over that. I'm not planning on reading it all. Sharon did a great job of summarizing it, but just want to highlight a couple of the points from the administration. So first, we have our guiding principles that we feel very strongly about, and Governor McKee's proposal is anchored in principles of equity, safety, and fairness. They're reflected throughout the proposal, which features a tightly regulated, privately run adult use license, as well as competitive tax structure, maintenance of local control, and emphasis on public health and safety. From a licensing standpoint, we contemplate a controlled rollout of adult use retail licenses. Our lottery-based system will ensure transparency, fairness, and equitable access. We'll structure the lottery such that the first 5 licenses are awarded to qualifying minority and women-owned businesses, and will make the existing compassion centers eligible by right for a new hybrid retail license. We also recommend a 1 year at a time approach to provide a measured way to get the market up and running. We'll also closely monitor data on market conditions and make a decision in the 3rd year about granting any new licenses. As far as the licensing framework, that's anchored in equitable access, we directly address this by setting aside 20% of annually awarded MB applicants. As far as local control, I know Sharon spoke a lot about it, so I'll just say that we contemplate the state centralizing and maintaining a significant degree of control over the location and types of adult use cannabis licenses throughout the state, while providing municipalities the ability to restrict parts of the industry from their borders. And towns can use land use and zoning tools to restrict the location and land use of cannabis licensees across the board. And the proposal also permits the assessment of local impact fees, which I think is important. From a public health and equity standpoint, we invest a significant amount of year one revenues in a number of health equity related areas, and will work to build out community-based health initiatives. Our sister agencies aim to build capacity in the realms of treatment, prevention, and surveillance, with a particular focus on adolescents and youth. The proposal creates the Governor's Reinvestment Task Force, charged with presenting recommendations for long-term investment of cannabis revenues in the specific areas of job training, small business access to capital, affordable housing, health equity, and neighborhood community development. In a public safety aspect, we prohibit use or possession for anyone under the age of 21. We update existing DUI laws to prepare for the introduction of cannabis-specific roadside and chemical tests. We invest $900,000 in state and local law enforcement capacity building, with $400,000 invested in state police drug recognition training, and an additional $500,000 made available to local law enforcement agencies in grants through DPS. And importantly, we maintain our existing prohibition on home grows. And finally, from a tax and revenue structure standpoint, we aim to establish an effective tax rate of roughly 20%, aligned with the current rate in Massachusetts. And this combines a weight-based excise tax, a marijuana-specific retail excise tax, and the existing 7% sales tax. And finally, 25% of gross revenues are dedicated to agency expenditures, 15% dedicated to local revenue sharing based on license and sales volume, and the remaining 60% will go to the general fund. And with that, we'll take any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you very much, Director. Checking my screen here for anyone with questions. I don't see any on the stratosphere, and I don't see any here that has any questions so far.
Chairman Abney?
I'm sorry. I see Rep. Bella Wilkinson.
Thank you, sir. I do have a few questions. I'd like to start off with thanking the director for her additional information. And this is the first time in a while that I've heard anyone directly address a roadside cannabis test. So I'd like to know what is the average amount of time that the officer would be on the side of the road conducting this roadside test? How long does it take for the results to become evident if someone is driving under the influence?
I'll take that. Good afternoon, Representative, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman of the committee. The issue of roadside drug recognition tests, generally speaking, the tricky one is an evolving one, and one that no state, including those that have had adult use for quite some time, has totally figured out yet. We, have been working with the Rhode Island State Police and the Police Chiefs Associations at the local level, make sure that they've got the resources and capacity in place to build out their own capacity and to have the training and the available funds necessary to better recognize impairment on the roadway. The direct answer to your question is it depends on what method they're using. There are sort of circumstantial and observational aspects of what it means to be a certified drug recognition expert as a law enforcement officer, and to some extent those observations and need the sworn testimony of a drug recognition expert, is often allowable as evidence in the blood and saliva tests that we're talking about by way of chemical tests obviously take longer. I believe that those actually have to go back to a lab and that sort of thing. So it's certainly not like there's a breathalyzer style test for cannabis yet. I think that there are a whole lot of money in the private market, private sector, trying to develop that. More and more states are fine with adult use. But again, it's an evolving issue, and it's one that everybody's kind of collectively trying to.
All right, thank you. Chairman, I do have a couple of additional questions, if I may continue.
Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. All right, so I know that Rhode Island has been talking about a lottery with regards to the licensing, and I've been reading an awful lot with regards to competition versus a lottery in terms of licensing. My question is, will Rhode Island be following a qualified lottery, or is this just going to be an open lottery?
So you're right that it is going to be a lottery that awards the licenses among a pool of qualified applicants. And like we're currently in the process of doing on the medical side, the department will be evaluating applications for things like substantial completeness, a minimum level of a viable cap table and a business plan, and compliance with things like local zoning ordinances and that kind of thing. And once that minimum bar has been met, the department aims to really take our hands off the final allocation and selection process, just by way of fairness and transparency, and to put those qualified applicants into a pool and then pick out from that pool of qualified applicants. So it wouldn't be, you apply and you're in. It's got to be a minimally qualified application, and then we'll pick you out of the lottery from there.
With all of the policy people that we have in the Office of Cannabis Regulation or the Cannabis Reinvestment Council, do we have anyone that actually has direct experience in growing cannabis?
If I'm understanding the question, do we have any former cannabis, can you clarify the question?
Yeah, I'm not talking about someone who has grown cannabis under a black light in their basement. I'm saying, do we have anyone who's on the regulatory side of the house for Rhode Island that's looking at creating policy for the sale of adult use cannabis? Is there anyone that has had direct business experience where they know about the security measures that are needed, that are familiar with the environmental paradigms that have to be followed for the water and for the runoff and so forth and so on? I mean, I see the future with this, and I've gone to quite a number of the growers that are at the medical marijuana centers. But I'm not sure, when we say that we have guiding principles of equity, safety, and fairness, I'm wondering, number one, if we have the right people that are at the helm, and number two, what is going to be done to help some of the home growers raise the bar of their procedures so that we are providing the highest quality product to those individuals that are going to them for consumption.
It's a great question. So to answer the first question first, I suppose we currently have, 8 staff members at the Office of Cannabis Regulation, and then a number of folks in our sister agencies who are also, in arms with us in the mission. Speaking for OCR, I don't think specifically have any former cultivation employees on staff and on payroll at DVR in my shop right now. Having said that, we have, a variety of skill sets on staff from investigative auditors and legal folks to, inspectors and people who have been boots on the ground with these licensees, and in some cases, for the past 10 years, and have really gotten, the up close and personal understanding of what it means to be a licensed cultivator or a licensed retailer, compassion center here in the state of Rhode Island, and have seen this program through as Sharon has kind of taken you through, has seen the program through from the state side, really the dramatic evolution that's occurred over the past 10 or 15 years in the state. I think to your second question, sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, Matt, I was just going to chime in. This is Pam Toro. Thank you so much for having us this evening. But we do have someone in our office who came from Washington State, who worked in that program for a number of years, who has extensive experience working around things like growth and cultivation and testing pesticides. And she works obviously very well with the folks that we have at the Department of Health, who have a high level of expertise. These are the folks who have been working on getting the testing labs up and running. And just additionally, the existing cultivators we have on the medical side, many of them did come from the caregiver and patient grow, and they have extensive, experience on the cultivation side. And I think we've done a great job working with them to help them really make a transition from that to a business and commercial cultivation. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Ms. Toro. So in looking at the slides, I didn't see the University of Rhode Island listed as any of the partners, especially considering their School of Agriculture. Is there a place for URI at the table?
Absolutely. I think that, other states, including, Connecticut, I think most recently has established a really innovative cannabis and marijuana specific track within their either agricultural or horticultural departments. We know, for instance, that, Johnson & Wales is starting to get off the ground an industrial hemp specific major, actually. That would be the first in the state of Rhode Island. And we're working on them actively to partner with state government in a number of really interesting and exciting ways. I would welcome, and we're happy to take this on as a next step. I would welcome a conversation with the right folks at URI, at our flagship state university, and indeed any of the public higher eds here that are interested in participating in this. It's certainly a growing industry. It's one that's likely to have high demand for both skilled labor and innovative and well thought out business practices. And to the extent that both DBR and any number of other state agencies from DLT and onward are able to kind of partner on that emerging area of the state's economy, I think it's a great idea.
And then going along with that, I would also hope that Bryant University might be looking at doing some business courses that would be connected to marijuana as a business, because we're looking at really high-paying jobs. And I think it would be a shame if when we start right from the beginning that we don't incorporate job development, because we've got to do something that's going to keep our youth in the state. And as you said, this is a bright spot in terms of labor expansion. So I'd just like to see us maximize that opportunity for our young adults as they come into the workforce.
Couldn't agree more.
And then the very last question that I have for you is, have there been any type of legal fallout in any of the other states that also have a lottery for licensing?
Yeah, I mean, one of the tricky things about this industry and where it stands right now is kind of, no matter how you cut it, you're going to potentially expose yourself to legal fallout. What I think we've made an effort to do is by setting up a lottery, minimize that to every extent possible. Obviously, we can never sit here and say we've eliminated it, but what we've seen in other states is where they really fall subject to often successful litigation from the folks that have found themselves on the wrong side of a licensing decision, is when those licensing decisions incorporate like highly subjective evaluations of merit and evaluations of qualification. And oftentimes, when you've got a state employee like me or my team sitting around and trying to, score things, 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 on a rubric. Reasonable people can disagree on whether or not a certain application should have been an 8 or a 9 or a 10. And if the line of demarcation is a 9, then the folks who have gotten an 8 are going to want to, have a conversation about where they fell on that spectrum. And it's very difficult to, we've seen in other states, and Illinois is going through this right now. Massachusetts, I think, also had a problem with it a year or two ago. When you've got to, as a state regulator, sit there and try and justify the decision to score somebody on a spectrum or on a rubric a certain way based on your own, essentially, opinion, that often falls apart in a court of law or in an administrative proceeding. So obviously, you cannot eliminate that risk entirely. We're not going to sit here and say that we've eliminated that risk entirely by the way we've set this up. But, we think, and in talking to our colleagues in other states, the lottery really takes that decision out of the regulator's hands, and that's a feature and not a bug of the way we've set this up.
My final question has to do with the smaller business entrepreneurs that are interested in breaking into this industry. So I recognize that it was said earlier that there has been some training that was made available for the growers to help them amp up their game so that they're working the whole system as a true business enterprise. And I was wondering what the opportunity would be to have some type of incubator system for these smaller businesses where they could work almost as a subcontractor with the larger, more professional and greater experienced organizations so that they can see how the security measures are handled and how the quality controls are made to make sure that there isn't going to be a problem with, with overwatering and any of the other problems that happens with the insects and such with the live inventory, and not just all of the dealings with taxation, which seems pretty complicated by itself. Would that be something that you'll be looking at rolling out?
I think it's a great idea. Article 11 doesn't. I think it's a great idea. Article 11 doesn't obviously specifically contemplate that, but what it does contemplate, and I want to be very, very clear about this, is what you're talking about is, I think, would be very within the scope of the Governor's Cannabis Reinvestment Task Force that's laid out in Article 11. You'll notice that does require a representative of a licensed cultivator on that task force, and that's a deliberate inclusion. To the extent that the people who are on the ground right now in this industry know best what they need to grow it and to make it a more inclusive and diverse and really dynamic industry at the end of the day, they should be the ones informing or helping to inform the state's decisions to fund new programs and that kind of thing. At the end of the day, we're not going to be able to sit around a table at DBR and figure out what the right way to stand up a cultivation incubator is. I think it's a great idea. We really would look to the participants on that task force to deeply inform the decision to make an investment in the long run and that kind of thing.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for all of your responses this evening. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questions for this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insightful questions. I'm looking at my screen to make sure. Vice Chair Mazurkowski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at the alternate proposals, and I know the Senate has a bill that's modeled after the Massachusetts program. So comparatively, why should we choose one proposal over the other? Can you speak about why do you think yours is better, theirs is worse, stuff like that? Sell me on it.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Let me just say off the jump, Leader McCaffrey and Chairman Miller and the Senate leadership staff have clearly put a ton of work into this issue, and it's an important issue, and very happy that they're looking so hard at it. And there's a lot of good stuff in that bill. And I think from where I said, we're very hopeful that we can get together and continue to have that conversation about where the shared, the areas of agreement are, and to the extent that there are differences, how to potentially reconcile those. What I think at a high level, you're probably driving at here is, very likely the governance model and the way the administration would deal with this issue, I think is probably the most obvious difference between the two bills. Obviously Massachusetts has made the decision to set up a cannabis control commission. Their medical market was at a little bit different point in time when they passed that ballot referendum several years ago at this point. The situation's not exactly comparable to where we are in Rhode Island. At the end of the day, what we would say and what you see reflected in Article 11 is the fact that we've had a pretty unique experience with this general issue area here in this state, and one that's seen really deep involvement from the Department of Health and for the past several years, the Department of Health and DVR in administering and expanding the medical program and the industrial hemp program. And to the extent that experience has given us the opportunity not only to evolve our regulations and our policies and procedures in a way that's informed by the on-the-ground facts of the case here in Rhode Island. We've developed in many cases, I'm happy to say, very deep and substantive relationships with our licensees, and that's been both a benefit to us as regulators to be able to have that kind of a candid and interactive relationship with these business owners and the folks driving this industry in the state. On the flip side, what I think you'll hear from many licensees is that it's a benefit to them to be able to pick up the phone and make the right phone call at the right time to get their question answered so that they can stay in compliance and they can keep running their business in the right way. Because at the end of the day, we want them to thrive as much as they want them to thrive within the confines and the boundaries of our existing regulations and statutes. So Article 11 really, aims to leverage that existing governance infrastructure, which is, not creating anything new, which, as you know, takes both time and money. It obviously adds the resources necessary to, the existing state agencies to deal with the new world of adult use marijuana in Rhode Island, but aims to do that in a way that really makes the most of what we've already got going on here. And that, I think, is both, the best idea for the taxpayers and, at the end of the day, most importantly, the best idea for the industry.
All right, thank you very much for that. Let me just write my notes down. Yeah, that was what I was driving at too. So you picked up on that. I appreciate it. Always like to know the comparative between the two proposals that we end up hearing. And then the other thing that I just made comments on is the new cultivator excise tax. Can you speak on that a little bit more? What are going to be the cost increase to the individual medical users?
Matt McCabe, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I can do that. So, that's a weight-based excise tax. As mentioned, we think it equates to around a 3% effective tax rate. So that would increase the medical tax rate, which is currently at 11% to 14%.
And I'm sorry, I lost you a little bit at the beginning. It was a little fuzzy on our end. If you could just repeat that again, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. So that's it's a wholesale tax. So it really depends on how much of that's passed down to the actual consumers. But if you take a retail price of an ounce of marijuana around $300 and assume the $10 per ounce excise tax gets passed down to the consumer level, that would equate to a 3% effective tax rate, which added to the current medical marijuana tax rate would equate to a total tax burden of about 14% for that market.
So 14% additional increase for the medical market?
So currently, the medical market has sales tax, which is 7%, and then the 4% compassion center surcharge. So that's 11%. That's the current medical
Gotcha.
retail
Okay, yeah.
tax. So then plus 3% of that is 14%.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking at my screen and checking here. Chairwoman Ruggiero, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for your testimony tonight. I want to commend the governor and all of you for acknowledging the social equity program. I think that's really, really important. You know, a lot of black and brown people in communities are seeing many people make millions of dollars on the legalization of marijuana after maybe they or a family member spent time in jail for possessing it. I've been in a number of webinars. This is really important, so thank you for that. My question, though, is we're getting a lot of letters and calls and whatnot from a number of municipal leaders, you know, mayors and town managers regarding the opt-out of the referendum. And my question, I guess, is what's the thinking around a special election that does cost cities and towns money, and also the concern that maybe special interest dollars will start flooding the state? Why not leave the decision to the local communities on something like that? What was the decision-making around that?
Absolutely, it's a great question. So there's kind of two parts of it. One is on the timing. You know, we've heard from, you know, we've heard these concerns as well. The thinking behind what's currently in the article is really geared at providing certainty and timely decision making to folks who are trying to set up shop here. Which is to say, if there's going to be a permanent referendum-based ban on either all licenses or types of licenses, knowing that sooner than later would be beneficial to the industry and beneficial to the economy here. Now, having said that, you know, we've had long conversations with municipal leaders about exactly this issue, and we understand the cost burden and the logistical issue. So, you know, those points have been very well taken, and certainly not something that we're taking lightly.
I appreciate the fast track to the economy, but, you know, we will, if this passes, I don't know, but it will happen in June. And then a special election just, you know, 4 months later. Is that sufficient time for cities and towns to have a special election?
You know, what we've heard from certain mayors and town managers is that they'd essentially have to get the, you know, really, you know, they'd have to get the ballots printed. They'd have to make that decision by August. So, you know, we get that it's a tight timeline. If the assembly, you know, ultimately makes the decision to push that back a year, you know, certainly that's not something that we're going to object to really at all.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Did most of your questions get answered there, Chairwoman? Just want to be sure.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Okay.
And I thank you for joining us tonight and answering the questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yep. Vice Chair Mazakowski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. Somebody brought it to my attention because I usually always ask why. So based on my previous questions, why is there an increase? Like what's the rationale behind that? Is there anything?
Behind the imposition of the excise tax on medical
Yes, exactly.
cultivation? You know, there's a practical consideration at hand here, and Matt McCabe and OMB can keep me honest, but at the end of the day, we fully envision that our existing cultivators are going to be growing product for both medical and adult use markets and medical and adult use retailers. As our Chief of Revenue Analysis, Paul Dion, often likes to say, medical and adult use marijuana are perfect substitutes, and literally these are going to be plants that are growing side by side and being processed and trimmed and packaged in the same facilities. And you know, it just makes sense as a principle of uniformity and efficiency of tax principles to apply the retail excise tax to both sides of the house, so to speak.
Okay, my only concern with that is if we apply the excise tax to both sides of the house, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. If we apply the the same logic on both sides of the house. Is it penalizing almost the medical patients over like the recreational patients?
So certainly can't object to the, it's clear that this is a higher level of overall tax on the medical product than currently exists. So you're right about that. What we talked a lot about as a general matter when we were putting this bill together, how these two markets are going to interact with each other as the adult use market takes off and as the medical market expands. There are a variety of really tricky operational and economic interplays that we fully anticipate, but it can in no way predict perfectly how they're going to shake out. So what you'll see in there, and Sharon highlighted this in her presentation, is a self-imposed requirement that DDR and OMB and our partner agencies get together after a couple years of implementation and take a really hard look at the overall impact of adult use marijuana implementation and all that comes along with it on medical marijuana generally, access, price levels, that kind of thing, and specifically calls out in the budget article a requirement that we specifically make recommendations to revise, if needed, the tax structure and the fee structure, both on the licensing and on the patient side that currently exist in the medical program. Because we, as I sit here today, I'm not going to tell you that we're in perfect equilibrium. What's been proposed in Article 11 by way of taxes and fees on the medical and adult use side combined is not and should not be a permanent resting state. We really fully anticipate just keeping a close eye on that and learning as we go along and making recommendations as necessary.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's something important to me, and it's on the radar, making sure that people are taxed appropriately for one thing, and then taxed maybe a little bit less that is appropriate for the medical side of things. So with that,
Chairman,
thank you very much.
would it be helpful, we could have also Matt McCabe just kind of talk about the difference in the tax structure between the medical side in totality with the recreational side, if that's helpful to you.
Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, so it's still, to your point, it's still a bit lower tax rate on the medical side. So I mentioned it's a 14% tax rate in this proposal. The adult use side would face a 20% effective tax rate. So it's still a bit lower on the medical side in this proposal. And as I mentioned, there's the 4% compassion center surcharge. Obviously, if the General Assembly believed that 14% tax rate was too high, we could always tweak the compassion center surcharge, though that would have a revenue impact, obviously, on the state. But yeah, our goal was, I think, to ensure that there was a lower tax burden on the medical side, but to Matt's point, not overburden these cultivators with having to kind of separate their product, which at the cultivation stage is going to be largely, as Matt said, pretty interchangeable between the medical and adult use side of those markets.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your kindness in answering the questions of the panelists. Checking my screen again to see if we have anyone remotely with a question, and then checking inside to see if we have. I think that exhausts the questions that my panel had for you tonight. So I want to thank Director Warmer, as usually, for bringing together a great group of people who can help us discern this. This is not an easy thing to do, but thank you very much, Director Warmer, and hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, me too.
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, the next phase of what we're doing, we've got a couple more phases to go. We've got 3 bills that we have to get in, that's been held for further study that we want to get into play. And Chairwoman Williams has 2 of those bills. And after that bill is in, those 2 bills are introduced, and any questions that she may have to answer, I'll enter in the bill for Vice Chair Slater, and then we'll go to the phones. So, Chairperson Williams, you're on.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the Finance Committee. I would like to start out by saying thank you for all the department heads, staff, for being there. Unfortunately, I'm multitasking. I'm an oversight committee as well. So I had to jump off and jump on to this one. So I want to also share to you all that, you know, it's a common culture. It's been a practice for eons, whether with this new administration, which, you know, it's exempt at this moment, but the previous administrations, with regards to always overlooking or dismissing the needs of the community of color, the urban core, you know, our children, our schools. So it's nothing new. So here I go. Okay, the store tactic, this is a new day, and we have to change things for the better, for everybody. I'm gonna start with 5452. And it's also another tactic that's utilized is to do studies, to, you know, derail or slow down or dismiss the needs. And just for the record, we need to have this analysis so that there is no question, seeing that, you know, it appears that folks are, oh, we didn't realize, oh, we're making multi-millionaires already in our states. You know, people from the outside coming in, becoming rich off of us, our hardship, and leaving the state, and some even residing with their beach properties that they're maintaining and enjoying, while some of our family members are sitting in prison behind what they are now considering a profitable business. The intent of 5452, this legislation, is to ensure that people most harmed by marijuana criminalization, especially the community of color, be offered assistance to enter the marijuana industry as entrepreneurs or as employees with a high quality and well-paying jobs. It is also the intent of this bill to ensure that barriers to people of color who have been disproportionately harmed by marijuana prohibition are reduced or eliminated, thus allowing entry into the legal marijuana industries. The bill also serves to offer technical support, regulatory compliance assistance, and assistance with securing the capital necessary to begin a business in the emerging new marijuana industry by reducing barriers to licensures and employment of persons of color who have been disproportionately harmed by marijuana prohibition. These supports will also aid the state in eliminating or reducing the illicit marijuana market by creating opportunity for people into the legal marketplace. This bill directs, the Department of Business Regulation to undertake a social equity and race analysis to examine whether racial disparities exist. Yeah, okay. In the process of obtaining a state license to sell marijuana and in arrest and conviction rates pertaining to marijuana. The act would also ensure that a policy is implemented to promote an equitable distribution of licenses and certificates related to these industries. The act would also establish a loan program to administered by the Department Business of Regulation to assist persons of color or persons found to be disproportionately impacted by marijuana prohibition to gain access into the marijuana industry. Finally, the bill provides for expungement of past criminal misdemeanors and felony convictions for marijuana offenses. Anyone with a prior conviction for misdemeanors or felony possession of marijuana, possession with intent to deliver marijuana, or distribution of marijuana shall be entitled to have the criminal conviction expunged and have all court costs waived with respect to expungement of their criminal record. I think it's due time. And that is my testimony for 5452. And I certainly, I would be remiss to not say that the individuals from the department don't understand what I'm talking about, even though my Spanglish is sometimes very confusing to most. But listen, I can adapt to your world, and it's our world. So any questions you have, I will do my best in answering them, either here or privately, and I'll appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman. I'm checking the screen here to see if anyone remote has any questions, and I don't see that anybody here has any questions. So you can proceed to your next bill, please.
Okay, 5451, are they scared? Do I scare them? You know, shoot. The truth hurts sometimes, and a lot of people are so concerned about talking about reality, our reality, that is. This act would apportion remaining revenue in the restricted receipt account after Department of Health expenses from the Edward O. Orkins and Thomas C. Slater Medical Marijuana Act to the Distressed Community Relief Fund and charitable organization. 75% shall be paid into the Distressed Community Relief Fund. 25% shall be paid to charitable organization selected annually by the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the President of the Senate. The medical marijuana program was never designed or instituted to make money for the state. Its sole purpose is to provide medicine to patients in need. However, it is for this simple reason that any leftover money from fees or taxes used to run and manage the program should be given back to the community. This is especially true in regard to our state's distressed communities whose residents have been negatively affected by our state's marijuana laws far more than residents in wealthier communities. By reinvesting this money into our distressed communities, we will begin to right the wrongs caused by marijuana prohibition, which has devastated too many of our residents and their futures, particularly within Rhode Island community of color. All for conduct that may soon be deemed legal and encouraged to recreational adult use of the marijuana. I just want to add to this before closing, is that our reality, while it's not yours, and I'm talking about the Caucasian members of the department as well as members of the committee, it's not yours, but it is real. And we've had to deal with this for far too long. And the time has come for us to really do the right thing. And I'm looking forward to my colleagues in government and the department heads and the governor to do the right thing. Because fair is fair, and we have come to the crossroads of doing the right thing. And all of us, if we're in it together, we're going to do it and accomplish it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. Again, I'm looking at the screen to make sure we don't miss anyone with questions. Yes, Rep. Nardone has a question for you, please.
Yeah, Madam Chairwoman, can you hear me?
Yes, very light, but I can hear you.
Okay. My question is, do you have any estimate about how much revenue would be coming in?
At this particular time, I don't know exactly, but what we were looking at was what we would ask to get from what the existing was about $300,000 for the community, which is peanuts compared to what those investors and these perpetrators have been getting behind the scene. But I can't give you that number. I don't have that number. That should be able to be gotten from Department of Business Regulations that had their hands in the till and the finance. I'm sure Sharon can come up with some numbers that answer.
Okay. And just one more question. How did the bill get drafted? So what's left over, the 25% that's left over, it's going to be in the hands and it's going to be given unbridled power to both the Speaker and the Senate President to spend on the charity of their choice?
No, I always like to respect my leadership, and that percentage would definitely be with them, with them having the authority. But that does not mean that it would not have our voices to say it needs to go to this particular charity. It's not necessarily a charity of their choice, because remember, this isn't, they have not, and the record is there to prove it, they have not offered or taken care of the urban core or people of color in decades, all of them. We have one that's over there over 40 years, and the record reflects everything has gone to those individuals, the status quo. So it's definitely we as a entity, a whole, a people, okay, have a voice now. So we are not only the item, the menu on the menu, we're at the table speaking up and out and saying, look, I can tell you what our needs are before you can dictate to me what that need is.
Oh, okay. I mean, my only concern was because you have two people spending taxpayers' money at their own discretion, but you say that the people will have a voice in that spending.
Can you hear me now? Trust me and believe me. They may be in there, but trust me that the recommendation, the suggestion is going to come from the people. It's not where they're going to have a big pocketbook and they can just dole out the money. Because how many people of color do they know? How many families do they know? How many organizations of color do they participate in? What our issues are that they're very well aware of and have done absolutely nothing to or for. So they need to hear where it needs to go. So they make the final decision, of course, but now we have a say, more than a say.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairwoman.